We come to something about civil disobedience on page 248. Hmm. He's famous for his civil disobedience thing. Didn't he influence Gandhi or something? He's launched the wave. The wave. Thoreau now stood at a professional crossroads. He had brought whole stacks of fresh manuscripts away from Matt Walden, enough to keep Greeley happy for years. Greeley's the guy paying him to publish out of New York. But if he would not follow Emerson's advice, neither would he follow Greeley's. You'd think he'd follow Greeley for the money. 10 years hence will do for publishing books, unquote, Greeley had warned, urging Thoreau to send him shorter pieces in the meantime to build up his reputation. But there on Thoreau's desk was the manuscript of, quote, a week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers, a very long book, and though he was working up a shorter piece he could have sent to Greeley, he did not. Quote, resistance to civil government, unquote. Eventually it would earn worldwide fame and notoriety under the title, quote, Civil Disobedience. On January 26, 1848, 3 weeks after entertaining the Lyceum with his ascent of Catadine, Thoreau stepped to the Lyceum podium again, this time to explain at long last why he had gone to jail rather than pay his poll tax. The disapproving Emerson was significantly still away in England. Thoreau called his new lecture, quote, the rights and duties of the individual in relation to government. And he had so much to say that 3 weeks later he returned to finish his remarks. Bronson Elcott, his fellow tax resister, praised Thoreau's, quote, admirable statement to, quote, an attentive audience. The Mexican War, Samuel Hoar's expulsion from Carolina, Thoreau's imprisonment for refusal to pay his tax, Hoar's payment of Elcott's tax when he was taken to prison for a similar refusal, quote, were all pertinent, well considered, and reasoned. I took great pleasure in this deed of Thoreau's, unquote. Only one other response to the lecture is on record. A year later, Elizabeth Peabody asked Thoreau if she might publish it in the first issue of her new journal, Aesthetics Papers. Yes, replied Thoreau, though he was too pressed for time to do much revising, and he stipulated to be published in the first issue only. Not held over for the next. He was right to be wary, for the journal failed after the first issue and a second never materialized. My goodness. Thus it was that on May 14th, 1849, quote, Resistance to Civil Government was published to the world only to vanish immediately into obscurity. The few reviews were uncomprehending. The author sniffed one, appeals to the New Testament and everything except for those ugly precepts about paying tribute and submitting to authority. Another thought, Thoreau's essay, the queerest in his collection of oddities. But still, quote, he writes straight on what he thinks, unquote. A third dismissed Thoreau's outright, quote, with an earnest prayer that he may become a better subject in time, or else take a trip to France and preach his doctrine of, quote, resistance to civil government to the rest of the red Republicans. Nevertheless, when Thoreau's essay was republished in 1866 under the new title, Civil Disobedience, it coined a phrase, started a movement, and eventually earned Thoreau international fame. We still have lots of incidences of civil disobedience even now. Don't we have Hong Kong now? Where else do we have it? What's the other country? We have it all over the place. It looks like the entire world has to reread Civil Disobedience by Thoreau in the current time period. In the interval between his arrest in July of 1846 and his two-part lecture in winter of 1848, Thoreau's sense of injury at the hands of people he trusted had simmered into a question at the heart of democracy. How can the individual assert the right to live a virtuous life in a society that refuses to permit that right, or worse, actively destroys it? Question. As Alcott's reaction to the lecture shows, in winter 1848, Thoreau spoke directly to his friends and located his protest in the specifics of Concord politics. The lecture itself has been lost, but the essay of May 1849 shows that at some point Thoreau universalized his arguments, even as he kept them grounded in the events and personalities of the moment, speaking and writing from all the contradictory impulses, mixed reactions, and delayed responses of lived experience. Do you think living the experience can help your universal concepts? Thoreau opens with an allusion to the red meat motto of O'Sullivan's Democratic Review, quote, "That government is best which governs least." A lot of people believe that, right? Goes way back to Taoism. Taoism. Or as Thoreau presses, quote, "That government is best which governs not at all." My God. This almost borders on anarchy. A nod to his instructors in peaceful protest. Now there's peaceful protest. Alcott and Lane, followers of Garrison's, quote, "no government" movement. But then he takes a startling turn. Thoreau rejects the rejection of government, quote, "but to speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for not at once no government, but at once a better government. Let every man make known that what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step towards obtaining it." Hence he looks over to Emerson, who had scoffed that a person who resisted civil government could hardly claim to be a citizen of it. Thoreau's reply is carefully considered. It is precisely, quote, "as a citizen," unquote, that he recognizes the need for government, in turn is recognized by the government whenever it hands him a tax bill. Therefore, it is as a citoyen that he has the right, indeed the moral obligation, to speak out. That is why taxes are the proper point of protest. Taxes are the sign of citizenship. And given that every tax bill presents the citizen with precisely two choices, pay or refuse to pay, both choices have to be deliberate actions. That is the product not of unthinking habit, but of a conscious thought of conscience. If you recall, they had the Mexican War, and they were annexing Texas and bringing slavery to Texas, and there was a whole bunch of things like slavery and war, and I think he was implying that by paying taxes, you're promoting and paying for those things. Maybe it could have been those things he's protesting, but should we pay for nuclear weapons?
That's why they should have selection. What are you going to pay? To have paid, let's say 20%.
I remember that.
To give them on education.
There was this in public finance.
So many things you can pay.
There was in my work in municipal finance, there was a county in California that would not take treasury bonds or bills as security because they promote nuclear war. So for collateralized guaranteed investment contracts, you cannot use treasury bills. You cannot use U.S. federal treasury bonds because they promote nuclear war.
Oh God, that would go full like a song.
I'm telling you, it's a real story. There's like Oakland or someplace in California. Thoreau's conscience was clean on the highway tax, which he paid willingly. You see, he paid for the roads, but not on the poll tax, since only those who paid could vote. It was not merely the sign of citizenship, but also the instrument of citizenship. That's why Emerson's quarrel that payment was relatively harmless, since only a teeny fraction of the tax dollar went for the, quote, mischief, misses the point. Quote, I do not care to trace the course of my dollar, if I could, till it buys a man, or a musket, or to shoot one with. The dollar is innocent, but I am concerned to trace the effects of my allegiance. It is an allegiance. Allegiance Thoreau refuses. Quote, I cannot, for an instance, recognize the political organization of my government, which is the slaves' government also. He doesn't support the South, for his allegiance could only abet the same government that enslaves men, shoots Mexicans, robs Indians of their land. These are the three abuses specified by Thoreau, each a distinct form of state-sponsored violence, and each a violation not merely of his personal moral conscience, but also of the ethical conscience of the larger community. Action from conscience, therefore, requires effective withdrawal from the state, at least until the state ends its abuse. Very good.
That's how you discipline the state.
You think they should be allowed to shoot Mexicans?
Don't laugh. It's fine that they do that.
Well, we're promoting not shooting Mexicans by supporting Thoreau. Thoreau didn't believe in shooting Mexicans. All right. Well, he's tying it to what the state does, let's say. We're reading about civil disobedience from 248 to 50.
Listens to your tape.
What?
Really bad because you laughed when you said.
When I laughed about it? Yeah, but I'm not really laughing at. I like Mexicans.
But you did laugh.
Yeah, I know, but that's because it's funny.
No, it's so funny.
It is funny.
It's not funny.
You can laugh about it. You can laugh about the Alamo. How many Mexicans were at the Alamo? 5,000 because they only had one car.